You are just doing side jobs and neglecting household chores. I am Sarah. I am 32 years old and work as a web designer. My husband, Michael, my mother-in-law, Jane, and I live in Michael's family home. Before getting married, I worked as a company employee. After getting married, I became independent and now work from home as a web designer. Most of my job opportunities come from the company I previously worked for. They are my valiant customers who appreciate my design work. In order not to lose these important customers, the company continues to trust me with projects. For me, this saves zone commuting time and helps me manage my household chores after getting married. The way I work now benefits both the company and myself, and I am satisfied with it. However, Jane seems to disapprove of me working. She has old-fashioned values and strongly believes that once married, a wife should be a full-time housewife and support her husband. She often talks about this. In this day and age, almost no household is like that. Most couples are dual income. Michael kindly explained to his mother, "If we're living on your salary, you at least need to handle the household chores properly." Jane seems not easily convinced. Even if you say it's a side job, it doesn't bring much income, right? Jane doesn't understand my job and always refers to it as a side job. For me, I believe I manage my household chores properly while working. However, it seems she is dissatisfied with how I work, which is different from her ideal of a full-time housewife. To Jane, who cherished her only son, I might appear as the unpleasant woman who took her precious son away. Shortly after our marriage, Jane has been continuously saying hurtful words to me. It seems that none of my actions pleased her. According to Michael, about 5 years ago, his father passed away, and since then, his mother's attachment to him has grown stronger. Michael often looks bothered by it, but it seems he doesn't mind being relied upon by his mother. The house we live in is located in a residential area and was purchased by his father about 30 years ago. The remaining mortgage was paid off with his father's life insurance and is now in his mother's name. It has an adequate number of rooms for the 3 of us, and I also have a room I can use for work, which is very helpful. Jane has been living here for 30 years and seems to have many friends in the neighborhood. They often come over to visit. Whenever one of Jane's friends comes over, I have to interrupt my work to prepare tea and snacks. Women of the same age as Jane from the neighborhood gather, and a session of gossip about their families and complaints about their daughters-in-law begins. My daughter-in-law finds some excuse to go back to her parents' house, and she's not here for half the year. My daughter-in-law spends money so recklessly. I feel so sorry for my son. At one point, we even had debt collectors coming over. It was a real mess. In my workspace, as I overheard such conversations, I felt increasingly disheartened. Jane's friends seemed to be competing to see which of their daughters-in-law had the most issues. They never had anything positive to say about their daughters-in-law. The daughter-in-law here is amazing. She manages to do her job properly while also handling housework. When one of Jane's friends complimented me, Jane's tone became stern. That job of hers is nothing special. She's just doing some minor work from home. I wonder how much she even earns. She's deliberately speaking loud enough for me to hear. Really, my daughter-in-law seems to think there's nothing wrong because she earned it herself, so she spends all of her part-time earnings on herself. Another friend responded, continuing the conversation. The money a daughter-in-law earns is hers alone, but the money the husband earns is for the entire family. Hearing this, everyone burst into laughter. We never thought like that back in our days, did we? Once again, Jane started reminiscing, so I decided to put on my headphones and block her out. I've heard this story countless times, and I'm honestly tired of it. Moreover, many of her stories seem to put modern brides in a bad light, and I don't want to hear them. I try to shut out the external noise and concentrate on my work. One day, Michael suddenly mentioned wanting to change our car. I'm thinking of getting a new car. Is that okay? During dinner with the 3 of us, this casual remark from Michael angered Jane. Why do you, the head of the household, need permission from your wife to buy a car? My husband quickly began to appease Jane. It's the car for all of us, so I can't decide by myself. Indeed, it's a big purchase, so maybe it's unreasonable for him to decide alone. Jane seemed unconvinced and further voiced her strong objections to Michael. You're the only one with a driver's license, so just get whatever car you like. Michael, who generally can't go against Jane, keeps glancing at me, unable to retort. It's okay. You can decide. Feeling sympathetic, I threw Michael a lifeline. Stop asking your wife for her opinion on everything and decide for yourself. Michael always seeks confirmation from either Jane or me for everything. While it's nice that he's considerate, sometimes I feel he's not really able. Tom, my father-in-law, would always decide things on his own, and Jane used to complain about it a lot. I've grown up seeing his parents act this way. Michael feels he shouldn't be unilateral in his decisions. However, Jane, who lived with the dominating Tom, seems to believe that's how husbands should be. Jane's discontent towards Michael, who consults me on everything, ends up being directed at me. Because of what Sarah keeps telling Michael, that he's become like this, isn't it? Taken aback by this baseless accusation, I struggle to respond. That's right. I can't decide on my own because Sarah says she's worried. Michael started shifting the blame onto me, siding with Jane. Wait, I didn't interfere at all. Even if I'm blamed, I'm at a loss and can't do anything about it. As always, my husband takes Jane's side. We've been married for about 2 years, but he has never tried to protect me in front of Jane. Sorry, I truly always think of you as the most important. But when he says this without Jane around, my distrust only grows. At first, he seemed to care about me regarding this matter, but in the end, he didn't take my side. I've started to consider taking action. If the situation continues, I'm worried about whether I can endure living with my husband for the rest of my life. Kindness and indecisiveness are 2 different things. I wished he would voice his opinion clearly to Jane. About a month later, my husband's new car was delivered to our house. The smell of a new car is always refreshing. Let's go somewhere far on our next day off. Jane also speaks with a smile to my cheerful-looking husband. You bought a nice car. Was it expensive? But with your salary, you can easily afford this, right? In response to that question, my husband didn't reply and continued to happily touch every corner of the car. Punching the luxurious new car, I was taken aback. Though I told him to get the car he wanted, there's a limit to my patience. As soon as my elated husband entered the house, I confronted him. How much did that car cost? My husband, without paying much attention to me, innocently remarked, around $40,000. Seeing the surprised look on my face, my husband continues speaking, looking puzzled as to why I'm so shocked. You said I could buy any car I liked, right? Jane quickly came to my husband's defense. Exactly, you left the decision to Michael, so no complaints now. Indeed, when we discussed it, I left everything up to my husband, but it's problematic if he doesn't consider our household's financial situation. Where are you planning to get the money? I interrupted Jane's story and asked my husband. Well, I'll take out a loan. On behalf of my husband, who was at a loss for words, Jane let out a scream-like shout. Sarah, you're not the one paying, so you shouldn't complain. Jane seemed angry, either because I had interrupted her or because of the harsh words I'd said to my husband. She looked at me with a menacing expression. You're eating because of Michael's income, and all you do is complain. What an ungrateful wife. Jane was speaking more aggressively than usual. I work too. In response to my protest, Jane defiantly retorts. What are you talking about? Your part-time job hardly earns anything. Michael brings home $3,000 a month. Jane looks down on me as if to say I couldn't possibly earn that much. I was about to say that's the amount I earn. I tried to interject. Suddenly I realized it. Michael had disappeared and fled to his room. I thought this for a while now, but I can't stand it any longer. We don't need it. By flake, you pack your bags and leave. Jane finally voiced out her thoughts. It was me who was enduring all along. I never intended to discuss how much I earn, especially not under these circumstances, and I lost the will to argue back. I felt anger rising at Jane's words, and I was also fed up with my husband's attitude. Originally, it wasn't a root cause of this argument between me and Jane, but Michael, again, his indecisive nature, a clear flaw, was showing. I understand. I'll leave as you said. With that, I went to my room, grabbed only the essential items like my work computer, and left the house. I'll come back later to collect the rest of my things, I told Jane, who was glaring at me with a fearsome expression. Michael stayed hidden in his room and didn't come out. The next time you come here, you better bring divorce papers. Unable to contain her anger, Jane shouted at me. Do you hear me? You are a failure as a wife. I was shocked. I had never seen Jane use such harsh words before. If I had let Jane's words get to me, I felt like I might lose my sanity. So I left their home without saying a word. Was it because they didn't like that I did as I was told and left? Or was it because they couldn't forgive me for daring to discuss money matters with my husband? Regardless of the reason, all I knew was that I wanted to leave that house as soon as possible. After leaving my husband's family home, I had nowhere else to go, so I decided to return to my parents' house for the time being. What happened all of a sudden? Sophia, my mother, seemed unable to hide her shock. I don't need to know what happened, but take your time and rest. Jason, my father, seemed to grasp the situation from the troubled look on my face. After that, I received no communication from my husband. The loving husband I had known before we were married was nowhere to be found now. I regretted not seeing my husband's true character, who would only act as Jane instructed. Talking with my parents about my husband and Jane helped ease my mind. You don't have any children, so I think it's better to get a divorce sooner rather than later. Sophia advised me, and I felt the same. I have a supportive work environment, so I won't face any difficulties in my day-to-day life. Over the weekend, with my father's help, I moved all my belongings from Jane's house. My husband was nowhere to be seen, and Jane didn't even attempt to come out of her room. I stood in front of my husband's room and spoke to him. Thank you for everything up to now. Can you fill out the divorce papers? I slipped the divorce papers through a gap in the door into my husband's room. I filled out the divorce papers. Is this okay now? With a disgruntled tone in his voice, the divorce papers were returned through the gap under the door. Realizing that our marriage had ended in such a manner, a wave of sadness washed over me. I didn't want to speak to Jane, so I left her house immediately. I didn't want to remember the house where I had lived for roughly 2 years. I headed straight to the city hall, filled with the desire to submit divorce papers and clear my mind. I wanted to end things quickly if it could be done with just a piece of paper. After the divorce, I've been staying at my parents' house and have continued my job while I searched for a place to live. As I was considering moving out on my own, Sophia approached me. You can stay here for a while. I can help you out more than if you were living alone, she said. Jason was keen on me living alone either. Michael and Jane are unconventional people. They might come to your house, he warned. Although I thought that was unlikely, being with my parents was very comforting. In fact, I could work from anywhere, so I decided to stay at my parents' house for a while. 2 months passed, and just when I had almost forgotten about my ex-husband, I received a call from an unknown number. Who could that be? Probably a wrong number, I thought, choosing not to answer. However, the calls kept coming. Reluctantly, I answered, and to my surprise, it was Michael's voice. Why didn't you answer my calls sooner? He sounded extremely agitated. I didn't recognize the number, and I didn't want to answer. We have nothing to do with each other now, so please don't call me, I retorted. As I was about to hang up, he said, Wait, my phone isn't working. Do you know why? Would I know? Contact your service provider, I suggested. But then something occurred to me. By the way, have you not deposited money into the bank account during our marriage? I used to deposit my earnings into an account for paying utilities. Michael's salary was also transferred there, but it was a meager amount and never sufficient. Michael worked as a salesman for health products, but his salary was mainly commission-based, and his base pay was quite low. While those with good sales records and numerous contacts could earn a substantial salary, Michael's performance was subpar. He mostly received just his base pay, which meant he only contributed a few $100s to the account. I had always been the one to deposit money into the payment account, especially towards the end of the month. But for the last 3 months, it had been solely Michael's salary. I left our marital home in the middle of the month, right around when payments for that expensive car likely started. From his silence on the phone, I could tell Michael was realizing the gravity of the situation. We've been managing the household with my income until now. You'll have to figure it out on your own from here, I said. I wanted to say, good luck with that, sarcastically. But I bit back the words and ended the call. and said, "I suspected Michael never told Jane about his actual earnings." It seemed Jane had no idea that ever since we got married, we had been living mostly off my salary. Michael was probably too ashamed to admit he earned less than his wife. I've heard that essential utilities like electricity and water can't be immediately cut off. The first thing that can be disconnected, I learned, is the mobile phone. Several days later, on a morning off, the intercom of our home rang insistently. When my father went out to see who it was, there were raised voices at the entrance. "We no longer have any business with you. Please leave." I was shocked to hear my gentle father raise his voice. Wondering what was happening, my mother and I hurried to the entrance. "I need to speak to Sarah. She's here, isn't she?" I was taken aback by Jane's voice and felt my face tense up. Just as Jason had predicted, she had come to our family home. When Jane saw me, her eyes bulged with anger. "As you didn't deposit money into the account, both our electricity and water had been cut off." My parents and I were too stunned to respond. "How could the electricity and water be cut off?" Michael, trying to defuse the situation, intervened. "Mom, stop this. It has nothing to do with Sarah." Jane continued to reach, dodging Michael's attempts to calm her. "Michael's supposed to earn $3,000 a month. Why have our utilities been shut off?" "It's actually me who earns $3,000 a month," I clearly corrected Jane's misconception. Jane looked shocked and turned her gaze to her son. "Yes, it's true. All this time, it was Sarah who was earning that, not me," Michael confessed with a downtrodden look. "Wait, how can you earn so much from part-time work?" Jane, looking as if she'd been deceived, stared at me. "I've always said it's not a part-time job. It's a legitimate work-from-home position." My face went pale. "How much do you really earn, Michael?" Jane, with a blank expression, asked. "If I get $300, I consider myself lucky." Michael's spoken voice was so faint it seemed he might disappear. After occasional silences, Jane said something unbelievable. "Sarah, can't you come back? When I told you to leave, I was just lying." Jane's tone had changed so much that it was almost unrecognizable, from tender to bleeding. "What are you talking about? We're already divorced, and I don't want to have anything to do with you in the future." Even after my clear response, Jane continued to make brazen requests. "Why don't you remarry Michael? If you start over, everything will go back to the way it was." As I was too taken aback to reply, Jason intervened fiercely. "We have no ties with you anymore. If you don't leave now, I'll call the police." Intimidated by Jason's authoritative voice, both Michael and Jane hurriedly left. "If you come back, I'll report you to the police immediately," Jason sternly warned the retreating mother and son. "I wonder how such people can be so ignorant," Sophia sighed, but Jason's anger seemed even more unyielding. "It's a good thing we cut ties with people like that early on." Sometime after that incident, I heard about Michael and Jane's current situation from one of Michael's friends. Apparently, Michael sold his family home and land and began living in an apartment with Jane. By selling the home and land, he was able to repay his debts. However, instead of working hard with the money left over, Michael squandered it all on gambling. After using up all the money from selling the house, his whereabouts became unknown. Jane, left on her own, developed dementia and was placed in a facility. As for me, things at work are going well, and I'm thoroughly enjoying living alone. Recently, I started dating a man I met at work. He understands that I have a history of divorce and is a sincere person in both his personal and professional life. He's not the type to misuse his partner's money and make extravagant purchases like Michael. We haven't discussed marriage yet, but we both feel that we can walk